This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth. Building wealth and protecting legacies since 2004. Invest better with Brenthurst.
Before I talk to you about your speech, I do have other questions that I think you can guess. Tell us why we have not had load shedding for over 100 days.
So, Chris, I think I must have a card in my pocket or a set of cards in my pocket that I can just hand out every time to explain this. And the end of load shedding is not a surprise. I think, as a matter of fact, in an interview with you that I did in 2023, I said that load shedding would end. And the math is very simple. There was a project to replace the steam generators at Koeberg 1 and 2. That's 2 times 920 megawatts. That project is essentially complete and is delivering to the grid. Initiated, by the way, before my time. So I won't take credit for it, but it's just a matter of timing that those units are back. Kusile 1, 2, and 3, we had issues, or Eskom had issues where the flue gas desulfurization unit collapsed. Those units were put out of commission. 3 times 800 megawatts came back and are now contributing to the grid. Kusile 5 and 6 reached beneficial operation. They are now connected to the grid and contributing. Medupi 4, which exploded spectacularly during my time, I wasn't involved, that was put back. So credit to the hard-working men and women of Eskom for continuing to fight quite a tough fight to get these units back. And by doing so, they restored the base. But there are a couple of other factors that come into play. What is often omitted is the fact that the private sector, in a period of 18 months, added 6.1 gigawatts. So that's about the size of 1.5 Medupis, which took 15 years to build. The private sector installed that in terms of rooftop solar in 18 months. And that made a huge difference. And you can see, if you look at the system, that every time that it's overcast and cloudy in Gauteng, the system starts to wobble. And it's because of that contribution. So again, to my point earlier, the private sector solves problems. The market works. The market addresses problems. But then lastly, and the last time I made this remark, I got into trouble for it and everybody took me to task, but the facts are the facts. When I was at Eskom, we were allowed to burn about 5 billion rands of diesel a year, which is a lot. And I felt bad for it because it's very, very expensive electricity that we generate. The latest budget is sitting in the region of about 23, 24 billion. And that's not affordable. It costs about 6 rand per kilowatt hour to generate electricity from diesel. But that makes the difference. So if you've got unlimited money to throw diesel, then problems magically go away. So that's the long answer to the question.
Meanwhile, for many people, you will always be the Prince of Darkness and deeply associated with our darkest days. And many people still bay for your blood. Why should your face not be on that wanted poster?
Well, that's something that I've asked myself. I think the only explanation is that I took on a pretty tough job. I gave it my damnedest. I really worked pretty hard to try and make it a success. I think that I started to put some momentum back into the system. You know, a large organization is like a flywheel. And once that flywheel has come to a complete standstill, it takes a huge amount of energy to get that flywheel moving again. Once it moves, you just need to give it a tap every now and then to keep the momentum going. But to get it moving takes an enormous effort. And once that happens, then the process works again. And yes, I know I've got this unfortunate association with the guy who sits on top of Table Mountain and smokes. But I do think that I made that contribution to getting the momentum back, particularly having regard to the damage wrought by my less than illustrious predecessors.
Andre, what could you have done differently, though?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask myself far more deeply, should I take this job or not? I think in retrospect, I would probably be like most people and say, you need to have your head read, and maybe that's what I should have done. I think I should have insisted on more clear and strong commitments to political support, because when the going got tough, I was quite frequently left out hung to dry. I think if I look at the lack of support, for example, in addressing criminals, and that's been well documented, not only in my book, but Carl Cohen wrote a book called Sabotage. Read about it, and it tells the story of how Eskom was deliberately undermined. And without the support of the criminal justice system, you cannot fight this fight on your own, and that's frankly why I eventually lost patience with the pace at which things were being done. So I would have asked for more guarantees in writing rather than just trusting. Maybe trusting a politician is, as a general rule, not a good thing.
Did you think when they gave you the job that you could have just taken their support for granted at that time?
I think if I looked at the constellation, Jabu Mabuza was the chairman who appointed me, and he and I had a really good relationship. But I could not have foreseen that he would have resigned essentially in the first month of my tenure, for his own reasons, and then that started, a slide where I did not have the political air cover needed to do this job.
Okay, I'll leave some load-shedding questions for the audience for later. So I'm going to go back to your speech. Like you rightly said, it's an alternative SONA. That alternative SONA is a fantasy speech. So what are the chances of it ever being made? And if it's not made, what then?
I think it's a great question, and with your permission, maybe we should ask the audience, by a show of hands, who think, and there will be two questions, who think such a speech should be made, and who think that it will be made. So let's first ask who thinks that it should be made. Okay. Who thinks that it will be made? Okay.
Thank you.
I think that answers the question.
But you're cheating. You're getting the audience to answer for you. No. Okay. South Africans, let's go to the grim reality, from fantasy to reality. South Africans live in this grim reality, waiting for politicians to change their reality. If that doesn't happen soon, and it certainly doesn't look like politicians are going to change reality, how can South Africans change that reality themselves?
Well, you see, this is where things become very challenging, because if you look at the situation that is developing in Nepal at the moment, where the youth, the unemployed, dissatisfied youth are taking to the streets. They physically drag the Minister of Finance semi-naked through the streets. I think it was Dr. Anton Rupert who said, you cannot sleep easily if your neighbor is hungry. And there's still a lot of merit to that statement. So I think we need to get impatient, and we need to get alarmed. I was also reading up about Morocco, and Morocco is investing something like 24% of its annual budget in infrastructure. And lo and behold, investors are streaming into Morocco to build factories, to export from there using affordable labor, competitive labor, to export to the European Union. So these are the two paths that I see, and I'm not sure if there's much of a middle road here. So we really do need to pivot.
What would meanwhile be the most effective and fastest way to rescue the parastatals?
I think the first question to ask is, what businesses, if any, should the government be involved in at all? I think there's something like between 700 and 900 parastatals. Why? We're not. The business of government is not business, to misquote an American president. Government should get out of business. Wherever there's a service or a good that can be provided competitively by the private sector, let it be done by the private sector. I think it's just such a no-brainer. Government should enable investment. It should facilitate investment. It should address those areas where the market will not provide. Because the market is clever. I'm a strong believer in market forces, and I think the amount of waste, but also moral hazard that happens in state-owned enterprises. Remember, all of these state-owned enterprises play with money that is guaranteed by the taxpayer, ultimately, by the treasury. So their cost of capital is significantly lower than the private sector. And therefore, there's this moral hazard of being able to compete with the private sector, but having a built-in competitive advantage that is not supported by innovation, efficiency, and good governance. And that, to my mind, just doesn't add up. Government should get out of business.
Okay, I'm going to do one last question before I throw you to the wolves. Tell people what you've been doing, otherwise you're going to have to tell everybody over coffee. And do you still want to make a contribution to this country, to public life in this country? Do you still feel willing and able to do so?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to be able to accept an invitation to go and teach at Yale. A really fantastic experience, ideal opportunity to decompress, first of all. It's great not being recognized. And being in the US is a complete eye-opener. The size of the economy. You know, that the South African economy would probably come in, counting from the bottom up, at round about number 15 or number 20 of American states. That's how small we are. So we are tiny, we are insignificant, and we must let go of our delusions of grandeur. We are really a small country. And having that experience was really amazing, and talking to very, very smart people on the Yale faculty, some of whom have become good friends. So after the completion of my stint at Yale, I had an old Toyota. I had some money saved. I had the means, the motive, and the opportunity, and I did it with my family, a cross-country trip from Connecticut through the southern states to California, up through California, and then back through the northern states. And that's also an eye-opener, because then you see what how wholesome the so-called flyover states are. These are good, solid people. They're often tainted by associations in the media. Hillary Clinton famously called them the deplorables, which is nothing could be further from the truth. These are good people, and they should be respected. It's a bit like going to parts of the Eastern Highveld, just solid, good, honest people. So that was a wonderful experience to experience all of America. Then I've taught a bit at Oxford as well. So I guess my best job description at the moment is being an itinerant scholar. Also doing a bit of consulting for renewable energy, which I still believe has a significant role to play in South Africa's energy solutions going forward. And yeah, that's it. Flying below the radar up until today, hopefully.
Okay. So I'm going to share some questions with you. Okay, I think this one is from Piet Viljoen. If Mr. de Ruyter had to run a book, or write, maybe Piet, run a book on the actual future we face, what odds would he put on the fairly utopian picture he painted, especially given his experience at Eskom?
Well, this is the question, right? This really is the question. And I asked myself, who am I to be so presumptuous to suggest to the president what he should say in his sonar? I mean, it is quite presumptuous, and some people will no doubt call me arrogant for doing it. But if we don't paint a picture of what can happen, then the alternative will definitely happen. So if we stop hoping and agitating for hope to be realized, then the downside will definitely occur. So, let's put the proposal out there. Let's see what happens. If nothing happens, at least we have the somewhat dubious satisfaction of being able to look in the mirror and say, at least we tried, rather than saying, you see, I told you so.
Here's a question from Davie Root to Andre. How does the size of Eskom's workforce compare to similar utilities globally and their remuneration?
Right, Davie, that's a leading question if ever I heard one. So there was a famous World Bank study that said that Eskom was, 40% overstaffed, and that study unfortunately used data that subsequently was proven to be incorrect in terms of the comparators that were chosen. So it excluded a large part of the distribution business, for example. So the oft-quoted statistic that Eskom should reduce its workforce by 40% is unfortunately not substantiated. What I did do, just by natural attrition, hiring freeze and so forth, when I joined Eskom, the workforce was about 53,000. By the time that I left, it was 48,000. So there was at least a start to reducing the workforce. Remuneration, I think average remuneration is now sitting at about 900,000 Rand per annum, and that's average, which is very high. Now, bear in mind that Eskom is a technical organization, so it employs a lot of engineers and technically skilled people. But we have seen years of above inflation wage increases forced on not only Eskom but on business generally by unions. And that creates the incentive to reduce your labor cost by retrenchments. And ultimately, I'm not sure if labor unions think through this strategy fully when they price themselves out of a job effectively.
I think this one is from Rob Hersoff. Andre, you said sabotage was crippling Eskom. I announced on SABC that Eskom was riddled with mafia. If both were correct, and that's true, why did it mysteriously stop after you resigned? Did the mafia retire, or were your claims exaggerated, or did Mteto and Dan clean out the cadres who were enabling the mafia?
What is less well known is that SAPS instituted a specialized unit, 24/7 unit, looking at crime and corruption at Eskom. They obviously didn't make a big meal of it because that would have vindicated what I was saying, but they did. Unfortunately, that unit has recently, so I'm told, been deprived of funding, and it's scaled back, and it's now confined to office hours, as though criminals keep office hours. So that's quite concerning. But the word clearly had gone out that sabotage and corruption had gone too far and should stop. The other factor, very interesting, that I also figured out maybe after the fact, was that part of my tenure coincided with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And immediately, supply of Russian gas into Western Europe stopped, and Western Europe had to buy coal from South Africa. And Rob, you're in the commodities market. You'll know that coal prices spiked. So that spike in coal prices created a huge arbitrage between Eskom contract prices and export prices for exactly the same quality of coal that could then be stolen and exported from South Africa to Western Europe. And that's exactly what happened. And that's why a lot of our operational issues indirectly can be attributed to Mr. Putin, which is kind of weird when you think of it, but that's the butterfly effect of being involved in a fungible commodity.
I think this is from Eden Gangiano. How come whenever in the world renewable penetration has increased, so too have electricity prices?
I think one should be careful when you compare the cost of new renewable energy, bearing in mind that a characteristic of renewable energy, apart from the fact that it is self-dispatching, another characteristic is that you spend all of your capital up front. After that, your operation and maintenance cost is negligible and there's no fuel cost. So when you have a fossil base like South Africa has and like most countries have, then your capital has been spent and has been largely amortized. And the only cost that remains is your fuel cost. So in order to pay for that initial bulge, there is a cost that needs to be paid. If you look, however, at the levelized cost of electricity, and this was the subject of an entire lecture series that I gave at Yale, so let's not go too deeply into that. But the levelized cost of electricity now for solar and wind is far and away the lowest of any form of electricity generation anywhere in the world. When you compare new coal with new solar or new wind, new nuclear is actually very similar in terms of its cost profile. Very expensive to build initially, but then afterwards the cost of nuclear fuel is actually negligible. I'm a fan of nuclear, by the way. I think we should have more nuclear as a general solution to our energy problems. So I think that hopefully answers the question. It is a function of the introduction of a new technology.
Okay, here's one from Jacques Popard, I think. During the height of load shedding, did we ever come close to a total blackout? If it were to happen, how long would it take to restore the national grid?
So a total blackout is a disaster scenario. That is what you don't want. And Eskom prepares for this. Eskom has highly skilled people who develop excellent contingency plans that are gone through and practiced in order to A, avert a total blackout, but B, to recover very quickly once that has happened. But we never came close. I can say that with confidence. We always had something in the tank where we could go to stage 8, which we fortunately never did. But unlike what recently happened in Spain, where I believe the blackout that occurred was due to the system operator being asleep at the wheel. The system operator who sits in Germiston, particularly a chap by the name of Gav Herford, who probably should get some sort of medal for managing the system, they prevent load. They prevent a national blackout, and they do a fantastic job. Really, these people don't get enough credit. They are magnificent.
Okay, here's one from John Endres. How important was the report by the engineering consortium, mostly German, on Eskom? Was it useful, and were its recommendations implemented?
So that report was commissioned by National Treasury, and it was never shared with me. I never saw it, not while I was there. It was subsequently published sort of surreptitiously after I'd left. And I think the reason why I didn't enjoy a particular profile was that it largely corroborated what I'd said. This was not a complex investigation. It said we need competent power station managers, we need discipline, we need to improve procurement practices, we need good quality coal. These are not complex answers. If you read the report, there's no eureka moment where you say, we really should have thought of this. This was all known, but it was very difficult to address given the particular constellation of circumstances.
Here's one from René Kilner. Can you comment on Eskom's pricing and its insistence on recovering historical debt in today's pricing, resulting in totally overpriced energy?
Yeah, I think this is another area where I think what we should do as a country is to move as quickly as possible to an open and competitive electricity market. The amount of money that's available for investment in power generation is incredible. It's there. And the sooner that we give consumers the choice from whom they can buy and at what price they can buy, the sooner we will have a competitive market to the benefit of the country. If you think about the economics of installing solar panels on your roof, if you go for a really nice system, maybe it'll cost you, 150, 200,000 rand. Where else can you make an investment that will have a guaranteed return that doubles every year at double the rate of inflation, which is really what we've had in terms of electricity pricing? And more people, including businesses, are doing that math and understanding that energy independence is the way to go. So the term for this is grid defection. People are defecting off the grid. And by defecting off the grid, of course, they are compounding Eskom's problems, because ultimately Eskom will be left with non-paying customers and non-paying municipalities. And raising prices is not a good way to respond to that challenge.
From Talal Salim, why do we have to pay twice for electricity services, paying to Eskom, the generator, and paying local municipality, the intermediary money collected that doesn't add any value?
I think that question is best addressed to His Worship the Mayor. Personally, I think that we should get electricity distribution done like mobile telephony. We should have a Cell C and a Rain and a Vodacom, and they should bid for your business, and you should be able to switch between electricity providers, obviously with the infrastructure, which is the fiber leading to your house, for example, being maintained. But consumers should have the choice from whom they buy electricity. And maybe you want to buy renewable energy, maybe you want the cheapest energy, so you go for an interruptible supply. I don't know. But let the market provide. That would be my suggestion. I think the notion that municipalities can use electricity as a way of collecting more revenue without adding the value to it doesn't make a huge amount of sense for the citizenry. It may make a lot of sense for the municipalities, but not for the people.
Davi wants to know whether NERSA should exist.
If you are of the school of Javier Milei, the answer is no. Maybe we should just have a maximum tariff to prevent some poor farmer sitting out in the middle of nowhere being held ransom by suppliers. The same can be said about the fuel price, the petrol price. Why should that be regulated? I think we should just have open competition, but maybe with a maximum price, so that the guy who wants to fill up his bakkie and koekenhelp is not taken to the cleaners because he has no alternative. But with that very limited exception, again, the market is the most efficient mechanism to allocate resources and prices on a transparent and immediate basis.
Okay, here's another one from John. Will the green transition be abandoned as the US turns to cheap energy and outcompetes the Europeans who favor expensive energy?
This is a very interesting question because I think that it's more than just the US. I think we should look at, for example, the reaction of OPEC. Oil prices are, in real terms, incredibly low at the moment. $75 a barrel, $72 a barrel is quite low in historical terms. And if you look at it from a supply perspective, why would OPEC do that? And the point is, and it's particularly Saudi Arabia that's doing it, is they are cutting back production to the point where fossil fuel still remains competitive. And that oil price impact has a percolating effect through the entire system. I don't think there will be a new coal plant that is built, certainly in the US, definitely not in Europe. Even in China, coal plants that are under construction are being completed but won't be commissioned because of the very aggressive rollout of renewable energy by the Chinese. What the Chinese are doing is just mind-blowing. They add twice Eskom's total installed capacity every 3 months, just in renewable energy. So these chaps are just amazing. They really are mind-blowing. So that is the trend for the future. Gas in the US at the moment is very cheap, $2.52 per MMBTU, Henry Hub, but and that will remain cheap based on Trump's policies. But I fear that he is ceding a technological advantage to China in the process.
We have time for one last question from Ignis Leroux. What are your thoughts on the proposed daylight robbery tax for those who have installed solar?
Since I'm in the process of putting panels on my own roof, I'm very opposed to it.
Thank you, Andre.
This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, South Africa's leading boutique wealth manager, trusted to guide families for over 20 years. Invest better with Brenthurst.